Hi, and welcome back to Family Sociology. We're now looking at Chapter 3. This chapter is on getting together. Now, this isn't exactly about marriage. We're going to follow that up in another chapter. But as a society, we still value marriage. I want to make that comment. Now, marriage is a socially or it's legally and or religiously recognized union between people who commit to one another. But it's still considered the norm. However, there are more than one route to get into a family situation. Marriage isn't the only approach into a marriage or family situation. So when we look at what a family is, which we looked at last week, and we see how there's differences that affect families. They're not all exactly the same, whether that be diversity or other issues. We are now going to look at mate selection. In this particular chapter, that's what getting together is, and the process by which partners are selecting one another. It's a natural starting off point for us to explore family life. Marriage isn't the beginning of family life. Getting together or mate selection is the beginning of family life. You can't have a family unless you first have somebody whom you're going to have a family with. Now, we're going to look at in this chapter is arranged marriages and romantic love, or marriage by choice. And with arranged marriages, it's a type of marriage in which partners are selected by a third party. Often it's parents, but not just by parents, but other people. And then romantic love is more looking at the strong emotional attachment that people will have and partners will have by selecting one another. And it's involved with a mixture of sexual desire, tenderness, affection, playfulness, and it's considered to be what's more recent, if you will, in terms of the getting together options. So we're going to look at the sort of European, North American societies developing this romantic love, and we're going to look at mate selection or courtship. It's still very common in the way we begin our family life cycle. It's generally been started that way. And in addition, with how relationships are established and usual ways that it continues. So this chapter is going to look at essentially getting together as a couple, deciding about whether or not this is a relationship that can be maintained and how we maintain it. And that's something we'll do in this particular chapter. All right, so let's get started right away. Now, in many cultures where arranged marriages are the norm, men are expected to provide the financial support for the family of procreation. Now, remember, the family of procreation is the one that you're developing, and the family of which, in this case, the woman's family, where she was born, as well as other needy relatives. Now, in North America cultures, we value an individual achievement sort of faction or belief in terms of our society. So in North America, each person is responsible for his or her own success and for the well-being of his or her own family of procreation. And so there's a complete difference in terms of culture across North America, and for that matter, most importantly, across the world, around how mate selection is established. Now, mate selection began as it's the most common starting point for any family. Pairing may be heterosexual, or in more modern times today, we see it as also homosexual. Now, the first step is mate selection. That's the first part of any family start, is mate selection. Whether that is something that you've done over a long period of time and really try to establish a connection with somebody, or whether that was something that happened much more quickly, but nonetheless, that mate selection is what is the first stage, or the first step, if you will, of any family beginning. Now, the next steps can vary. Some couples live together, but they never marry. Some couples marry before living together. Many begin with a premarital cohabitation and eventually marry. Now, that even varies from province to province. We'll find that in Quebec, it's a very high rate of cohabitation in relationship to other provinces. And so all families begin with mate selection, but then how that process unfolds for people can vary from person to person and from couple to couple. Now, what's really important when we look at the beginning of this family cycle and establishing a connection between two people is what's called these developmental tasks. And there's two primary developmental tasks associated with establishing a couplehood or or a mate selecting and establishing that relationship to where you might want to start a family. The most important in young adulthood is establishment of intimacy. Now, intimacy in this case, in terms of family cycle, isn't necessarily what you might suspect or might think. Intimacy is a sense of close emotional connection, a relationship with one another, where the ability and freedom to disclose one and another's innermost secrets and innermost selves to the other person. And so intimacy is something that you don't have with very many people, and having a high level of intimacy with someone unique and special in terms of a partner is where that level of disclosure is very high. And so you don't hide who you are, you sort of disclose and build trust and establish that sort of connection that you have with one another, where it becomes a natural flow to begin starting a family when you have a level of commitment and intimacy that's very high. The second developmental stage here is that of a foundation of a relationship that separates you from everybody else. And so a defining relationship of self, realigning relationships with one another and one another's partner's family, their friends, establishing the foundation of a relationship. So who am I to you? Who am I to your friends? Who are your friends to me and us? Who are our families to one another? And establishing this sort of, this is who we are in relationship to everybody else. We're not so much just individuals now. Now we're becoming a partnership, a couple. And so defining that sense of self. So there's two developmental tasks that are important before starting a family. And typically it's this development of intimacy and a sense of this higher level of trust and disclosure, and establishing a foundation of a relationship of defining oneself and defining the couplehood. According to symbolic interactionalists, interacting patterns that are formed while dating often continue throughout the relationship. And so we find a continuity about how we date and the sort of, how we fight, how we make up, how we dialogue, who does what, the sharing of responsibilities of how we do that in our dating is often how we carry through in terms of our formal relationship and family life thereafter. Now, mate selection is divided into two basic streams. It's either decided by the couple, that's one, or the second would be decided by the family of the couple. Now, in South Asian families, for example, men are expected to provide financial support for their family of procreation as well as their relatives. If a father dies, his oldest son or brother will support his widow and children. Because they're not regarded as wage earners, women are devalued as a financial liability. The well-being of the family as a whole takes priority over the individual happiness. Now, in most societies and historical periods, marriage has been at least partly arranged through most cultures and over most time. It's only been in the more recent time that things have been altered, based on familial considerations rather than individuals' desires. Although arranged marriages have become rarer, they continue to occur in many parts of the world among many immigrant groups in Western societies. There are many pressures on children of new Canadians to marry within their ethnic group. A common strategy used by parents is to restrict the social interactions of their children. Because they may not want to follow the customs that they've learned in Canada instead of those of their own ethnic group, second-generation immigrants indicate that conflicts with their parents in the realm of dating and marriage are pretty common. And we'll talk about this a little bit later, but in sociological perspective, the newer, younger Canadians that come from parents of different backgrounds find that living in two cultures, their parents' culture and their new Canadian culture, find there's oftentimes conflicts about how to behave and how to dress and how to act and dating customs and other kind of customs. Now, forced marriages, these are marriages in which people are coerced into marrying against their will, very different from arranged marriages in which the free and informed consent of both parties is present. So now when we see a shift towards more free choice, the origin of the term courtship is linked to 12th century France, where young knights performed deeds to prove themselves worthy of love of the lady of the manor. Given their lack of financial resources, they had to do things that would demonstrate, they would be courting, if you will. Now, over time, sex and romantic love became gradually linked along with the emphasis of individuality. Young people wanted the right to choose their own mates. Love became the basis for marriage. Western society has gradually shifted from arranged marriages towards free choice. Bumpy versus smooth shifts occurred more quickly in some parts of the population than others. Changes reflect the changing social conditions and advance in specific knowledge. The earliest settlers in Europe brought this tradition with them to North America, where this focus on romantic love and free choice was combined with the emphasis on individual achievement. Now, when you're looking at the relationship continuum, the arranged and self-chosen marriages are often treated as being very different. However, they lie on a continuum, with complete arranged marriages at one end and completely self-chosen unions on the other. There's also a continuum for the idea of marriage as an exchange, and marriage as shared emotions. In North America, most individuals are in the romantic love on this scale, and we are socialized from childhood to fall in love. So you look at, in the world, the relationship continuum is where we see in different parts of the world, the relationships can go anywhere from arranged to free choice and anything in between. Couples often wait until they are financially and educationally ready to marry. Now, men are more likely than women to show off their material assets, the education that they have, their job, their car, where women tend to emphasize physical appearance through increasingly their ability to contribute financially. And we see that a lot in our Canadian society, is that with there being more diversity in the workforce, more women taking on work before starting families, we see that financial stability is becoming a very important element about unions and marriages. Both men and women display sympathy, kindness, helpfulness, good manners, and humor when it comes into this establishment of relationship. Now, there's two sort of theories here. One is complementary needs hypothesis, and here's where individuals feel most attracted to potential partners who complement them, as reflected in the saying that opposites attract. Now, there's an interesting response to this theory, and one is that often those most successful relationships that last the longest are based on the relationships of people who are more similar. That opposites aren't actually the thing that brings about the greatest long-term success in relationships. Now, social exchange theory, this is based on the idea that individuals evaluate the potential success of a relationship based on a number of comparisons. An example would be like peer comparisons. How does this person that I'm thinking about compare to other people? Physical attractiveness in female partner, status, financial resources in the male partner. People tend to fall between two extremes, either using both exchange values and emotional appeals to attract a mate. There isn't an absolute way in which mate selection happens, but there are certainly theories about how that might occur, and it's because of such much variation in cultural backgrounds, in sociological perspectives, in order to nail down any particular one way that any persons get together in terms of the relationship towards family. Now, with the freedom of choice, theoretically we can marry almost anyone we choose, but we are limited in some social and cultural ways. There are legal barriers to marrying certain people, one marriage at a time, for example. Incest is taboo, and then there are things that are called endogamy and exogamy. The term endogamy means marrying within your specific group, whereas exogamy means to marry outside your own social group. Now, geographical factors are important here. We tend to marry within the specific regional area. And so the tendency is, whether you marry within your group or outside your group, you tend to marry within your geographical area. Now, there's a term that's called field of eligibles. And these would be people who are considered acceptable potential partners both by the individual and by society. When substantial age differences exist, women tend to be younger than male partners. People with ethnically different, diverse friends are more likely to marry across ethnic and racial lines. as are members of second and third generation families. And so when we come about freedom of choice, as much as we have the freedom to choose anybody, there are limitations. It's not an absolutely free choice. And lastly, in this first video, we'll look at the wheel of love. And what we're looking at here is a theory on how we can combine the evidence about homogamy and marriage with the ideals of romantic love. Is it possible? And according to this theory, all forms of love and friendship develop through four processes, and that's the quadrants in the middle. The first is feeling of rapport. When people feel comfortable with one another, they reveal aspects of themselves such as their experiences, their hopes, their fears, their dreams, and it's that experience of rapport. You could describe rapport as that time when you would talk with somebody and you're so into the conversation that you find yourself mirroring each other's sort of actions. You know, someone leans towards them and leans on their right elbow. The other person across from them who they're talking with does the same. They're not doing it consciously, but it is starting to represent a level of communication and rapport. You might start using some similar words. You may find that time flies. You know, you thought you were talking for a half an hour, and when you check your watch, you notice 3 hours has passed. This would be this sensation of rapport where you feel very connected, very comfortable, and you start revealing things and you feel understood. The second phase is self-revelation, and this can occur over many areas of life. It can also expose expose private feelings, ideas. Usually, only close relationships involve revelation. This is to suggest that there aren't very many people whom you would be sharing this type of information with, maybe only this person. These are often encompassing sexual activity, whether it's preferences or whether it's just engaged with that type of an activity. So you're really an exclusive group here. The third phase in the development of mutual dependencies. Individuals begin to rely on each other to share ideas. You might have inside jokes, intimate feelings, and you become dependent on one another, that the other person is there for you and you are there for them. The fourth process is personal need fulfillment, and this comes into play if needs are fulfilled, there is growing rapport, and the circular process is renewed. So the more that there is needs met and are fulfilled, there's more rapport, there's more self-revelation, there's more mutual dependency, and it repeats and it repeats. So I think that's where we're going to leave this particular video. I'll carry on with the second video with looking more at getting together and some of the history in that one. All right. Thank you very much, and keep up the good work. And we'll see you in the next video. Bye now.